Why a cube? A 3D model for a tridimensional reality and human beings. We live in a tridimensional space-time, and everything in it has 3 dimensions, no more, no less. The emptiness, point, line, or plane are mere abstractions of 0, 1 or 2 dimensions, but they don't exist in this world. The same applies to the 4th and 5th dimensions. They don't exist either, at least not on our physical world. We can imagine and we can represent these abstractions. There are mathematical functions for them, and we can draw them on a blackboard or describe them with words. Even create a vacuum or conditions in the laboratory that prove that there might be more dimensions. However, no one inside this bubble has ever seen, touched, or manipulated a point, a line, or a plane, or a 4th or 5th dimension. In reality, there is a 4th dimension, which is time. Time is required by relativity theory, along with 3 spatial dimensions, to specify completely the location of any event. Time is regarded as that coordinate dimension. However, it is not a spatial dimension, nor can it be seen in the Euclidean space, the only one that humans perceive. The time dimension is embedded in the model because, as Heraclitus said, change is the only constant in life. Changes occur over time, and thus, for modeling purposes, we leave the time dimension, some call it the 4th dimension, a constant in our model. Man is also tridimensional. All inside this world is tridimensional, and therefore, human knowledge is also tridimensional. Since before we were born, we were programmed to understand and act in 3 dimensions. We are beings capable of coding and decoding tridimensional realities over time. Everything from color to music, from politics to architecture, from Torah to the I-ching, from the works of Aristotle to Freud, has 3 dimensions. This work attempts to decode the source of all human acts by using a 3-dimensional model called uCube. How did we stump into this? In the 90s, Francis Fukuyama predicted the end of history because democracy had met free markets and mankind had reached the final stage of its economic and political evolution. Curiously, 150 years earlier, another man had arrived at the same conclusion, the end of history, but on the opposite end of the plane. Karl Marx said the end of history would come with the imposition of the dictatorship of the proletariat with the means of production owned by the state. Both philosophers developed their theories using an economic and political axis, but neither Fukuyama nor Marx considered the 3rd dimension and 4th of the model, which is the social dimension in time. Both assumed distribution for granted. One trusted it to the market forces and the other one to the good faith of the state. They did not consider time and the fact that conditions that make things possible in one epoch may change and render it impossible for those conditions to exist in another. Economic axis, free markets, political axis, dictatorship, tyranny. Karl Marx. History would have an end with the emergence of socialism and finally communism, the system that would end all the class struggles. Dictatorship of the proletariat with the means of production owned by the state. Francis Fukuyama. What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War, but the end of history as such. That is, the endpoint of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. We start building the model with a political axis that goes from democracy to tyranny. We intersect an economic axis that goes from controlled to market economy. This creates 4 scenarios. Scenario 1. Tyranny and state-controlled economy, like the case of Cuba. Scenario 2, democracy with state-controlled economy, like the Nordic countries. Scenario 3, tyranny with a market economy, like China. Scenario 4, a democracy with a market economy, like the United States. Marx thought the end of history was Scenario 1, while Fukuyama thought it was Scenario 4. But then the question is, what about the social axis? Bi versus tridimensional paradigm. Bidimensional models based on the Cartesian plane yield 4 paradigms. Tridimensional models based on the cube yield 8. Canada is not only a democracy that creates wealth, but also distributes it. Mexico is a democracy that creates wealth, but everything ends up in the hands of few. In the other extreme, China creates and distributes, but is a dictatorship. Haiti is a tyranny that destroys wealth and creates dire social conditions for its people. In Cuba, the Castros distribute poverty very evenly, but the country creates no wealth and has no democracy. As Albert Einstein proved with the theory of relativity, though we all share a common space-time, each of us views it from a different angle, and thus, one's reality can never be absolute. This is just a model, a simplified miniature of the complex world around us. It is just like a model train. It is a simplified version of a true train, and it performs the same basic tasks, but there is no way a Tycho model train can grasp the complexity of a Southern Pacific locomotive. Why now? We live in a world full of hatred and indifference, injustice and inequality. New formulas are needed to face new challenges. Old paradigms are falling. The market did not self-regulate, nor did it allocate income efficiently. States have never been good faith institutions, nor do economies move always in cycles, nor call it communism or the Washington Consensus. But solutions cannot arise from the source that created the problems in the first place. A new model of thought is needed. This is the goal of the uCube, to think outside the boxes or paradigms created by Washington and Moscow, by the IMF and the World Bank, by the Chicago Boys and the Kennedy School, by the Church, Torah, and Quran. Why Mexico? Mexico gives chaos a bad reputation. Few countries in the world are more chaotic, disorganized, and short-sighted than Mexico. For more than half a century, Mexico has been drifting without a model, without clear objectives, and without a vision. The cube could not have been born elsewhere. As subjects of a chaotic reality, we developed a tool to attempt to find an order and a route, a model to transit toward it. Nothing would please us more than to see uCube help Mexicans overcome their endless economic depression, political crisis, and social drama. uCube might provide a path that would take them forward. Why me? I haven't got the slightest idea. But one thing I do know is that I want a better world for them.